This week on Deadful Sunday, we'll be taking a look at the sequel that nobody wanted, but most understand is needed, which is the second lockdown announced by UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson yesterday evening. Saturday's spooky announcement saw many of the rules which were imposed in March be reimposed for all of England come 5th of November. Such rules, Sky News reported, includes the banning of international travel in and out of the UK unless for work, the closure of pubs, bars and restaurants, but not their delivery and takeaway facilities, and the closure of all quote-unquote non-essential retail, amongst a variety of other restrictions, for which more information can be found on the government's website. Considering that this week our session asked the question, can our identities be reclaimed through subversion, it is perhaps apt that we ask, are there limits to such subversion? We will seek to answer this question by using Foucault to frame the powers being exercised by the government in their Lazarus-esque bid to revive national lockdown. Within this Foucault frame, we will address whether public health as a common good are reason enough to nullify any attempt at subversion, even for identity. Foucault discusses at length his concept of biopower, that is, the power used to control large populations of bodies, i.e. humans, which is a useful concept to deploy here. Lockdowns, both new and old, are constructed on a framework of rules which police the actions of large populations of people. For example, post 5th of November, we will be unable to travel abroad, unless for work. The government, therefore, is deploying the system of rules which controls how a whole population of individuals may operate, will control what we can do with our bodies. Foucault remarks, what was being formed was a policy of coercions that act upon the body, a calculated manipulation of its elements, its gestures, its behaviour. The human body was entering a machinery of power that explores it, breaks it down, and rearranges it. A political anatomy, which was also a mechanics of power, was being born. End quote. Understanding how this mechanics of power is enforced is essential to this concept of biopower. Foucault turns to the role of the police and how it's evolved over time to become this repressive vehicle of power that it is now, an entity capable of exercising its oppressive capacities. He also puts considerable emphasis on how the police operate in neoliberal capitalist society. Foucault remarks that the invisible hand of the market finds its ideological extension and institutional complement in the iron fist of the penal state. End quote. Modern policing and the market economy, therefore, go hand in hand in discussions about who is, how, and for what purpose bodies are controlled. Throughout all of this, there is an undercurrent of inescapability. Foucault continually asserts and reasserts that these modes of control, all of this discipline and punishment, configures society in such a way that none of us is sure to escape prison. End quote. Now, let's take into account how Foucault views this policing of bodies and apply it to identities in lockdown. Pink News reported that many LGBTQIA+ people were struggling in Lockdown 1, either because they had not publicly acknowledged their own queerness, had not, that is, come out, and or were having to be locked down in hostile households, that is, with people, usually family members, whose views were not accepting of that person's queerness. So, come to Lockdown 2, where the prospect of the struggle is resurrected, where the hostility is once again intensified by the confinement to the smaller space of the quarantined home. How can we combine this need to assert identity with rules that problematise such assertions? Firstly, to what extent does the erection of Lockdown 2 on the basis of public health, i.e. for common good, transcend the individual need to assert and feel safe in one's own identity? Secondly, if we argue that the individual retains the right to subvert all authorities which restrict their identity, does that not also include Lockdown 2, regardless of its necessity for common good? Lastly, should a queer person, for example, whose life and selfhood are threatened, be exempted from the consequences of breaking Lockdown 2 if they've broken the rules for their own survival, by which I mean either physical survival or the preservation of their queer identity? Such questions, for which I do not have the answer, raise fundamental problems not only for the legitimacy of rules imposed for the common good, but for the liberal project of freedom from. It raises a perhaps unresolvable conundrum within this Foucauldian lockdown state, that of, What right does the individual have to subvert rules imposed for the apparent benefit of all, but by their very imposition, threaten the lives of some? Our question from Wednesday's session, can our identities be reclaimed through subversion, should be asked in conjunction with the question, how far can we go as individuals in our subversion, if in subverting, we may endanger others? All of this, the unanswered questions, the plurality of problems, the complexities, perhaps all point to one thing, Foucault's statement that none of us is sure to escape prison, end quote. Perhaps these fundamental flaws and contradictions are exactly what Foucault's theories point to, which is that we are rendered incapable of any individual agency because the power is exerted on us within this organising structure is too great, is too all-encompassing, is immortal in the death of those it forcibly organises. This marks the end of the 8th episode of DeadPhilSundays. We hope you enjoyed it, and that we'll see you next week.